Welcome back to another episode of Global Pulse in 60 Seconds. I'm your host, Chris Rameth, and today I'm delighted to welcome Claudia Preziosi, Head of Business Development and Operations and founder of Preziosi Consultancy. Claudia is an economist with a background in international business and development, who has built her career at the intersection of corporate operations, startup ecosystems, and social impact. Today, she supports startups as a marketing and business development consultant, while also being a strong advocate for women leadership in innovation through her work with founder communities. Claudia, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Keisra. Likewise, it's a pleasure being here.
So, you started your career as an economist with a strong grounding in international business and development, and then transitioned into startups, innovation, and ecosystem building. What initially drew you into the startup world, and how did those early experiences shape the way you think about innovation today?
So I started from a fairly traditional path, economics, international business, development, working with big multinational corporate. But I was always drawn to environments where change happens fast and where idea can actually turn into reality. So what really pulled me into the startup world was the intersection between innovation and execution. You're not just studying problems, you are building solutions in real time. And I guess that moving to Silicon Valley was the big inflection point for me. It's an environment where breakthroughs technologies are just not abstract, but they're happening around you every day. So the energy there is contagious. You see how quickly things move, how experimentation is encouraged, and how failure is just part of the process. Those early experiences really shaped how I think about innovation nowadays. For me, innovation isn't just about having a great idea. It's about translating that idea into something tangible, scalable, and impactful. And that requires not just creativity, but discipline, speed, and the ability to operate under uncertainty.
That economic lens clearly gave you a way of seeing the whole system, which probably makes it very obvious when a founder is brilliant at their idea, but sometimes blind to what it actually takes to run a company. So, when working with early stage founders, what are the most common things you see them say underestimate when it comes to operations and execution, especially in the early phases of building a company?
Mhm, mhm. I would say that one of the biggest things that I see, especially with founders coming from scientific or academic backgrounds, don't come for me, please, is the underestimation of what it actually means to run a business. Because a startup operates under a completely different set of rules. The pace is faster, the decisions are made with incomplete information, and there is the constant pressure to prioritize because you don't have a lot of resources. So you can't approach it like a corporate environment with long planning cycles, but you can't even treat it like a research lab where perfection is the goal. So another thing that I think is often underestimated is the importance of structure and processes. Ironically, even in a very dynamic environment like the startup one, sometimes founders resist to putting in place a basic operational framework early on, but without them, the execution becomes chaotic. So some structure and processes are really needed. And I guess the last thing that I would say is the leadership dynamic. The relationship between the co-founders and the leadership team, the board, are critical, and a misalignment can slow everything down or even derail the company. So operation isn't just processes, it's also how people work together under pressure.
That's such an important point, Claudia, because it highlights how great ideas alone aren't enough. And you've seen that not just one to one, but across an entire ecosystem. Now, you've spent a significant time at StartX, We were talking about that earlier, supporting founders and managing a broader startup community. From that vantage point, what truly enables startups to scale responsibly rather than just grow quickly?
So at startups, you get a unique vantage point because you see so many companies at different stages and you can really observe patterns. What enables startup to scale responsibly isn't just growth ambition, it's clarity and intentionality. The companies that scale well are very clear about what they're building, why it matters, and what success like beyond metrics. They also invest early in building strong foundation like team, culture, governance. That doesn't mean slowing down. It means like growing with awareness. Rapid growth without foundation often leads to fragility. And I guess that another factor, a key factor, is a bit to have the discipline to say no. Like not every opportunity is the right one, especially early on. So responsible scaling is about focus, doubling down on what truly creates value rather than chasing everything. And sometimes the one key aspect it's a bit overlooked, and it's the role of the community, because building a startup can be incredibly isolating. Founders are constantly making high stakes decisions, often without a clear reference point. You just don't know the answer. And being part of a strong, trusted community like the one that we built at StartX can make a huge difference. It gives founder a space to exchange experiences, get honest feedback, and realize that they're not alone in the challenges that they're facing. That kind of support doesn't just make the journey more sustainable and pleasant, it actually leads to better decision and ultimately to a more responsible scaling.
So true. And when we talk about responsible scaling, as you've mentioned, leadership and culture play a huge role, particularly in who gets access to opportunity and decision-making power. And that culture of responsible growth is inseparable from who's actually in the room and who has a voice in shaping it. Now, shifting the conversation, you've been a strong advocate for women leadership through your work with founder communities and your involvements in initiatives like the Stanford Women Leadership Conference. And that is what drew my attention and appreciation when we first met in Malta. So, from your perspective, where have we made real progress? And where do gaps still persist in innovation and startup leadership from that point?
Mhm. We've definitely made progress, as you said. There is more visibility, more networks, and more intentional effort to support women in leadership. And community initiatives like the Stanford Women Leadership Conference have played a big role in creating spaces where women can connect, learn, and support each other. And thanks God, now there are like way more initiatives everywhere in this world. But there are still a lot of gaps, and representation at the top level, especially in technical leadership and venture-backed companies and in the startup world as well, is not where it should be. And the access to capital is another persistent challenge for women's founders. There is also a more subtle gap around perception, confidence, and leadership styles. So women leaders often are like they need to navigate different expectation, and that can influence how they position themselves or are perceived. That just because the style of leadership is different from what a man would have. So that's a big point, actually. What I think it's important moving forward is not just increasing representation, but normalizing diversity in leadership, different leadership styles. And that shouldn't be exceptional, it should become the standard.
Absolutely, absolutely. When leadership is narrow, the solutions it produces tend to be too. And that has a direct bearing on the kind of companies we are building for the future. Now, another aspect I wanted to talk about is the fast moving startup ecosystem that often prioritizes speed and growth. How can founders build companies that are genuinely sustainable and impact driven without losing that momentum or competitiveness?
Of course. I think that at the starting point, like it's really important to stay true to your vision at the beginning. In the early stages, especially founders, they receive a huge amount of feedback from investors, advisor, the overall ecosystem. And so it can easily pull you in different directions. So it's important to listen, of course, but not to follow everything. You need to filter that input and stay grounded in your own judgment and intuition. And that clarity is what keeps you consistent and focused over time. At the same time, building sustainable and impact driven company means that thinking beyond the short term growth. It's about long term value creation, and not just financially, but also in terms of like how your company affects users, stakeholders, and the broader ecosystem that you're working on. Practically, it also comes down to very deliberate choices like who you hire, how you define success, and how you prioritize. Every one of those decisions shape the kind of company that you're building. So it's not just about choosing between speed and sustainability. It's about building in a way that allows you to grow fast, yes, but also to endure.
It's really a different definition of success altogether. And when you extend that thinking to the global stage, the stakes become much bigger. So, to wrap up our conversation in 60 seconds, from a global perspective, what is one leadership or ecosystem shift you believe would have the greatest positive impact on long-term global well-being?
Okay, this is a tough one, but if I had to point to one shift, it would be moving beyond boundaries because innovation doesn't really thrive within borders. The challenges we're trying to solve in global health, in medtech, or life sciences are inherently global, and that requires collaboration across countries, disciplines, and sectors. So, no single ecosystem, according to me, can tackle them alone. And for me, it's about building a stronger, more connected partnership, like bringing together researchers, startups, investors, and institutions from all over the world. And I think that when that happens, that's where you see the most meaningful breakthroughs. Of course, that requires a sustained support, both from venture capital and governments, especially in biotech, medtech, and life sciences, where lifetimes are like long and resources are critical. But ultimately, if we can think and operate beyond borders and truly collaborate at a global level, that's where we unlock the biggest impact on long-term health and well-being.
Absolutely. Innovation, does not just, happen in isolation. It thrives in collab when you're collaborating, with others. That's a powerful note to end on and a fitting one for someone who has spent their career turning that belief into action. Thank you so much, Claudia. It's been a genuinely refreshing conversation.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.